Shabbat Shalom, Parashat Masei, the final parasha of Sefer Bamidbar. The journeys that the Jewish people have taken throughout the desert is finally coming to an end. And this parasha will recount the entire saga, step by step, listing all of the different travels that were done, all of the stops, the different landmarks in which the Jewish people stopped throughout the desert during the last 40 years. And finally, then, the parasha is going to describe the boundaries of the future land of Israel. Those boundaries that we still pray and hope that one day we will be able to occupy. This final parasha also comes in sequence with the first day of the month of Av, Rosh Chodesh Av. As we celebrate Rosh Chodesh, we enter into a very difficult period in the Jewish calendar. A period of sadness, a period of mourning, a period that holds in it centuries upon centuries of suffering, of difficult times and difficult experiences. It is interesting that when we reflect on this particular parasha, one must ask, what was the Torah's objective in detailing all of these places in which we stopped? After all, we have absolutely no explicit knowledge of what all of these particular landmarks mean. These are towns and places that no longer exist. At least we don't know what their exact location is. And the Torah itself told us very little of them. In fact, some of the commentaries, some of the earliest commentaries, which is during the Talmudic era, state that many of these places never existed. In fact, the landmarks that I mentioned here are merely hints towards behaviors and actions and events that took place during these 40 years. In fact, it is setting the stage for what is going to come about in the next Sefer, in Sefer Dvarim, in which the Jewish people are going to have somewhat of a review of their contemporary history, a moment of reflection, of reevaluation. Most of the commentaries describing these various steps try to point out the messages of the difficulties that this journey entailed. After all, this was a journey of punishment. This was a journey of 40 years that was a consequence of a terrible sin, of a rejection of the great promise of the land of Israel, and the need for a new generation to be raised in the desert, being primed and prepared for the great day in which they will start conquering the land. So most of the midrashic material all points to the challenges that were presented throughout the way, the moments in which the Jewish people faltered and behaved in a difficult manner, and had to learn to behave better. I would like perhaps to present a different view, and that is that the objective of showing each step of the way is to hint towards the great character of the Jewish people. I've mentioned to you once before the great message that is presented within the words of Yirmiyahu Hanavi when he encounters the great chesed, the great deeds that the Jewish people have paid towards God. Somewhat of a reverse perspective, as much as most of the commentaries relate to the great chesed that God played with us, in which for the 40 years of marching through this terrible desert, we did not encounter any snakes or crabs. We did not have to climb hills or go down slopes. Our clothes never wore out. Our shoes were never worn. In fact, we never had to worry about sustenance. Our food was provided. Our liquid, our water was always plentiful and available. And this was all the great kindness of God towards the Jewish people during all these years of the desert. But Yirmiyahu says the exact opposite. He said, Zacharti la chesed nu'raich, lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz lo zeruah. I remember the great kindness of your youth in which you walked after me in this desert. You went after me in a desert that was not plowed, that did not have any promise. And you continued following with me. And we explained once before that Yirmiyahu Hanavi is trying to allude to the idea that the Jewish people took a great choice here. That at the moment of the punishment 40 years ago, when they were told that for the next 40 years they will wander around the desert aimlessly, any logical man would have packed his bags and have gone to try to start a new life elsewhere. Because wandering through the desert for 40 years until my personal moment of death emerges is not exactly what I call an exciting, challenging life. Definitely not a very fulfilling life. I might as well try my luck somewhere else. But that was not the attitude of the Jewish people at all. Bnei Israel understood all too well. We have sinned. We, of course, have lost our opportunity. But that means that now we have the great task of raising a young generation, of bringing up our children in such a way that they will be ready to be those chalutzim that we mentioned last week, to stand tall and proud and be able to lead the Jewish people into their destiny, into the land of Israel. And this is what they did for 40 years. Learning the Torah, learning how to build a nation, learning how to adhere to God's laws and God's commandments. Indeed, the Masaot are detailed here, step by step, to show us the great kindness of the Jewish people and how they marched through this desert from one step to the next, proud and totally committed to the future of their children and to the destiny that God has provided us with. The end of the Parsha, after all of the boundaries are detailed, present to us the final discussion over the personal destiny of the daughters of Tzlofchad that we learned about 2 weeks ago, in which they demanded and correctly received their own plots of land in the land of Israel. And now we learn of their cousins from their own tribe requesting that these fine ladies shall marry men only from their tribes in order to sustain the land within their tribe. So deep was the love of these people for the land that they are soon to receive. There is one particular verb that teaches us volumes of the nature of the love that we have to have for the land of Israel. You know, when we talk about our relationship with God, the way to describe the passion and commitment that we need to have for God is not expressed as much as through the verb of love. We use the word, ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. We use the word of reverence, of ve'areta me Hashem Elokecha. But there is one particular verb that describes the passion, the commitment that we need to have for God. The way that we observe mitzvot. It has become a common band name in our generation. Dveikut. Dveikut, or in its English perversion, dveikus, represents the idea that we are clinging to God. The word devek means glue. And we are asked to glue ourselves to God, to have that passion in which we want God amongst us all the time. It is interesting that throughout the entire Chumash, this particular verb, devek, glue, is only used in 3 contexts. One, over and over again, in the context of our relationship to God. Oto ta'avodu uvo tidbakun. Cling to God, and that's the way to worship Him. It is also mentioned in the parallel domain of the other ultimate relationship in one's life. Because there are 2 relationships that define the ultimate clinging that one must have, the ultimate passion and relationship. The relationship that we have to God and the relationship between a man and his spouse. And so, man is commanded in the early days of creation, Al Kain Ya'azov Ish et Aviv v'imo. And so, a man should leave his mother and father. V'davak b'ishto v'hayu lebasar echad. And one should cling to his wife and become as one. That is the passion that the Torah describes that one is required to have in their personal relationship. That is the way that a Jewish home is built. The one other time that this verb is used is at the end of our parasha. And beautifully, the Torah ends the journey of the desert. The Torah ends this sefer with the commandment. Land, your ancestral land, your inheritance should not be transferred as commodity from one to the other, but rather, ki ish benachalato yidbeku matot bnei Yisrael. Each and every one of us is required to cling to the land of Israel. The relationship that we need to have to this land is a relationship of passion, a relationship of ultimate commitment. We cling to the land just as we cling to God and just as we cling to our spouses. This trilogy, this three-pronged relationship, summarizes the commitments that we must have in our lives. Our land, our family, and our relationship to God. And so we end this parasha with the cry of Chazak, Chazak, V'nitchazek. Particularly on these days in which we reflect back to all the hardships that our people have had throughout the generations. We stand strong and call out, may we become stronger. May we become empowered to cling to God, to cling to our spouses, and to cling to the land that God has bestowed upon us. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.